Hello, Dark Reader, and welcome to the Dark Side of the Library podcast. I'm your host, Katie. Today is part 2 of all of the dark fiction releases that came out in June 2023. So I'm going to just get started. We have 9 books to go through. The first one on the list today is The Memory of Animals. This is by Claire Fuller, and this is published by Tin House Books. I've never heard of this publisher before. I think they're a subsect maybe of Tor. Anyway, in the face of a pandemic, an unprepared world scrambles to escape the mysterious disease causing sensory damage, nerve loss, and in most cases death. Neffy is a disgraced and desperately indebted 27-year-old marine biologist, registers for an experimental vaccine trial in London, perhaps humanity's last hope for a cure. Though isolated from the chaos outside, she and the other volunteers, Rachel, Leon, Yahiko, and Piper, cannot hide from the mistakes that led them there. As London descends into chaos outside the hospital windows, Neffy befriends Leon, who, before the pandemic, had been working on a controversial technology that allows users to revisit their memories. Ooh, okay. She withdraws into projections of her past, a childhood bisected by divorce, a recent love affair, her obsessive research with octopuses, and the one mistake that ended her career. The lines between past, present, and future begin to blur, and Neffy is left with defining questions. Who can she trust? Why can't she forgive herself? How should she live if she survives? This sounds interesting. It sounds like it's about survival, grief. There's a lot of suspense, lots of different stuff, like obviously a pandemic, but going into, it's almost like a Black Mirror episode is what it seems like. So this is called The Memory of Animals. This is by Claire Fuller. Next up, we have a book called My Men. This is by Victoria Kielland. So this is based on a true story of a Norwegian maid turned Midwestern farm wife, Belle Gunness, who's the first female serial killer in American history. And I'm going to be reading this. So among thousands of other Norwegian immigrants seeking freedom, Brynhild Storsett immigrated to the American upper Midwest in the late 19th century. She changed her name and her life, and now she goes by Belle Gunness. She was Bella. She came in search of not only fortune and true faith, but most of all, love. This is a literary reimagining of the harrowing true story of Belle Gunness, who slowly but irreversibly turned to senseless murder for release from her pain. Becoming America's first known female serial killer in pursuit of her American dream, Belle grows increasingly alienated, ruthless, and perversely compelling. It's a raw and visceral book. I'm very intrigued. This is called My Men. This is by Victoria Kielland. Next up is Night's Edge. This is by Liz Kerin, and it came out June 20th, published by Tor. So I've been trying to give Tor another chance. I had a whole slew of really bad Tor books that I read. All right, so having a mom like Izzy meant Mia had to grow up fast. No extracurriculars, no inviting friends over, and definitely no dating. But most of all, like the most important rule, is tell no one of Izzy's hunger, the kind only blood can satisfy. But Mia is in her 20s now and longs for a life of her own, one where she doesn't have to worry about anyone discovering their terrible secret or breathing down her neck. When Mia meets rebellious musician Jade, she dares to hope she's found a way to leave her home, her mom, behind. It just might be Mia's only chance of getting out alive. So obviously we've got a bit of a maybe vampire, maybe zombie book, who knows? So this is Night's Edge. This is by Liz Kerin. Next up we have The Only One Left. This is a Riley Sager book, and it came out June 20th. If it's Riley Sager, tons of people are already on it. We already have like 2,800 reviews on Goodreads. It's done pretty well, 4.2 on Goodreads so far. So check this one out for sure. At 17, Lorena Hope hung her sister with a rope. Now reduced to a schoolyard chant, the Hope family murders shocked the Maine coast one bloody night in 1929. While most people assume 17-year-old Lenora was responsible, The police were never able to actually prove it. Other than her denial after the killing, she has never spoken publicly about that night, nor has she set foot outside of Hope's End, the cliffside mansion where the massacre occurred. Stabbed her father with a knife, took her mother's happy life. I like this chant. It's very catchy. It's now 1983. In home health aide Kit McDeer arrives at a decaying Hope's End to care for Lenora after her previous nurse fled in the middle of the night. In her 70s and confined to a wheelchair, Lenora was rendered mute by a series of strokes and can only communicate with Kit by tapping out sentences on an old typewriter. One night, Lenora uses it to make a tantalizing offer. Quote, I want to tell you everything. It wasn't me, Lenora said, but she's the only one not dead. This is such a fun chant. I should read the whole thing at the end. As Kit helps Lenora write about the events leading to the Hope family massacre, it becomes clear there's a lot more to the tale than people actually know. But when new details about her predecessor's departure come to light, Kit starts to suspect Lenora might not be able to tell the complete truth, and that the seemingly harmless woman in her care could be far more dangerous than she first thought. I'm in, so in. I have to read it. This is called The Only One Left. This is by Riley Sager, and here's the whole quote here. At 17, Lenora Hope hung her sister with a rope, stabbed her father with a knife, took her mother's happy life. It wasn't me, Lenora said, but she's the only one not dead. Fun. So again, that is The Only One Left by Riley Sager. Next on our list today is The Other Side of Mrs. Wood. This is by Lucy Barker. This is more of an atmospheric historical novel about spiritualism, especially like being obsessed with it. Mrs. Violet Wood is London's premier medium. A woman of supreme ambition whose and unique abilities have earned her the admiration and trust of London's elite. Mrs. Wood is indeed a clever and gifted seer. Her skill is unmatched in predicting exactly what her wealthy patrons want to hear from the beyond. But times are changing. First, a nosy newspaperman has begun working to expose false mediums across London. Many of Mrs. Wood's friends, and yes, some of her foes, have fallen to his merciless accusations. Worse yet, though, Mrs. Wood's monthly seances tables are still packed. She's noticed that it's been harder to snare coveted new patrons. There are rumors from America of mediums materializing full spirits. How long will her audiences be content with quivering tables and candle theatrics? Then, at one of Mrs. Wood's routine gatherings, she hears that most horrifying of sounds, a yawn. A yawn, when a sweet girl with an uncanny talent for the craft turns up at her door. Mrs. Wood decides that a protege will be just the thing to spice up her brand. But is Emmy Finch indeed that naive she appears? Or has Mrs. Wood's own downfall come knocking at last? This sounds kind of fun. It's not super spooky, obviously, but I love the theme of it. This is called The Other Side of Mrs. Woods, and this is by Lucy Barker. Next on our list today is The Puzzle Master. This came out June 13th. This is by Danielle Trussoni. All the world is a puzzle, and Mike Brink, a celebrated and ingenious puzzle constructor, understands its patterns like nobody else. Once a promising Midwestern football star, Brink was transformed by a traumatic brain injury that caused a rare medical condition, acquired savant syndrome. I mean, of all the things that you could be injured with, I think that one would be the best. That's the best one. The injury left him with a mental superpower. He can solve puzzles in ways ordinary people cannot. But it also left him deeply isolated, unable to fully connect with other people. Everything changes after Brink meets Jess Price, a woman serving 30 years in prison for murder who hasn't spoken a word since her arrest 5 years before. When Price draws a perplexing puzzle, her psychiatrist believes it will explain her crime and calls Brink to solve it. What begins as a desire to crack an alluring cipher quickly morphs into an obsession with Price herself. She soon reveals that there is something more urgent and more dangerous behind her silence, thrusting Brink into a hunt for the truth. And this is where things get a little wild. So the quest takes Brink through a series of interlocking enigmas, but the heart of the mystery is the God Puzzle, a cryptic ancient prayer circle created by 13th century Jewish mystic Abraham Abulafia. As Brink navigates a maze of clues and his emotional entanglement with Price becomes even more intense, he realizes that there are powerful forces at work that he can't escape. This is wild. It's a thriller, but it's also like about the universe being at stake. It's kind of giving me some Dan Brown vibes. Anyway, this is The Puzzle Master. This is by Danielle Trussoni. Next, we have a widely anticipated novel, one that lots of people have already reviewed on Goodreads, and it came out June 20th. This is The Quiet Tenant. This is by Clemence, Michallon. Aidan Thomas is a hard-working family man and somewhat beloved figure in a small upstate town where he lives. He's the kind of man who always lends a hand and has a good word for everybody. Aww. But Aidan has a dark secret he's been keeping from everyone in town and those closest to him. Of course he is. No one's ever that perfect. He's a kidnapper and a serial killer. Oh dear. Aidan has murdered 8 women, and there's a 9th that is earmarked for death. Rachel is imprisoned in a backyard shed, fearing for her life. When Aidan's wife dies, he and his 13-year-old daughter Cecilia are forced to move. Aidan has no choice but to bring Rachel along, introducing her to Cecilia as a, quote, family friend who needs a place to stay. Aidan is betting on Rachel after 5 years of captivity, being too brainwashed and fearful to escape. But Rachel is a fighter and a survivor, and recognizes Cecilia might just be the lifeline she's been waiting for all this time. As Rachel tests the boundaries of her new living situation, she begins to form a tenuous connection with Cecilia, and when Emily, a local restaurant owner, develops a crush on the handsome widower, she finds herself drawn into Rachel and Cecilia's orbit, coming dangerously close to discovering Aidan's secret. Wow, so it's actually told in the perspectives of Rachel, Cecilia, and Emily, and it's exploring different different ways and perspectives of the women and his crimes and how that's associated with their lives. It's really interesting. I'm definitely picking this one up too. Wow, that was an easy sell for me. Serial killer. But this looks really good. It's got an amazing rating on Goodreads so far. 4.1 is actually quite good for 1,800, almost 1,900 reviews. This is The Quiet Tenant. This is by Clemence, Michallon. 2 more books here. We have Relentless Melt. This is like a supernatural detective thriller, and I'm digging it. It's like Stranger Things and the golden age of detective fiction mixed together. So this is by Jeremy P. Bushnell, and it came out June 6th. The year is 1909, and Artie Quick, an ambitious, unorthodox, and inquisitive young Bostonian, wants to learn about crime. By day, she holds down a job as a salesgirl in women's accessories at Philonese. By night, she disguises herself as a man to pursue studies in criminal investigation at YMCA's Evening Institute for Younger Men. Eager to put theory into practice, Artie sets out in search of something to investigate. She is joined by her pal Theodore, an upper-crust young bachelor whose interest in Boston's occult counterculture has drawn him into the study of magic. This is so fun. It's like Scooby-Doo, but better. I like it. So together, the journey into mystery begins on Boston Common, where the tramps and the groundskeepers swap rumors about unearthly screams and other unsettling anomalies. But soon Artie and Theo uncover a series of violent abductions that take them on an adventure from the highest corridors of power to the depths of an abandoned mass transit tunnel, its excavation suspiciously never completed. Will Theodore ever manage to pull off a successful spell? is already really wearing that men's suit just for disguise, or there's something more to it? And what chance do two mixed up young people stand up against the greatest horror Boston has ever known, an ancient, deranged evil that feeds on society's most vulnerable? Can they survive? Relentless Melt is the book. This is by Jeremy P. Bushnell. And our final book today is She Started It. This is by Sian Gilbert. It's a debut thriller about a Caribbean bachelorette party kind of gone awry. Annabelle, Esther, Tanya, and Chloe are best friends, or they were as children. Despite drifting apart in adulthood, shared secrets have kept them bonded for better or worse, even as their childhood dreams haven't really turned out the way that they thought. Then one day they receive a wholly unexpected, but not entirely unwelcome, invitation from another old friend. Poppy Greer has invited them all to her extravagant bachelorette party, a first-class plane ticket to 3 days of white sand, cocktails, and relaxation on a luxe private island in the Bahamas. Well, I would take that any day. So none of them had spoken to Poppy in years, but Poppy's Instagram pics show that the girl they used to consider the weakest link in their group has definitely made good and made money. Curiosity gets the better of them, as they do. Besides, who can turn down all of these things? Exactly, who could? The first-class flight and the island's accommodations are just as opulent as expected. Even the scenic island proves more remote than they'd anticipated. Quite remote, in fact, with no cell service and no other guests. The women quickly discover they've underestimated Poppy and each other. As their darkest secrets are revealed, the tropical adventure morphs into a terrifying nightmare. This is a twisty game of cat and mouse, and it's quite catty. This honestly sounds like a really fun summer read, especially if you are going on vacation. Maybe you are going on vacation with some girlfriends, and sometimes it's kind of fun to read books that are like akin to your trips. So this is She Started It. It sounds so petty too. I'm actually okay with this. It's by Sian Gilbert. All right, so that is our whole list of the adult fiction novels that we thought would be really intriguing during June of 2023. Stay tuned for July because there's a lot more coming out, and I'm sure we've missed some of the adult fiction novels that are spooky, gothic, morose, etc. So stay tuned every Wednesday and Friday for some new podcast episodes. Wednesdays, we tend to do curated books, and Fridays, I do deep dives of books I've been reading lately. Make sure to tune into our socials at Dark Side of the Library and visit our show notes if there are any books that looked of interest to you. Thanks so much for watching. We really appreciate it. Share this podcast with your friends, your loved ones, all the people in your life that love spooky stuff. Have a creeptastic week. We'll see you next time.